of things that come up when we're talking about confessions is, well, why aren't the suspects invoking their right to silence? Well, in the last decade and a half, the Supreme Court of the United States has modified the right to silence in a few holdings, a few court rulings that essentially state that it's not enough for a criminal defendant just to remain silent. The criminal defendant must affirmatively say to law enforcement, I am invoking my right to silence. Don't question me. And that right to silence expires after 14 days, at which time the criminal defendant can be approached again by the suspect can be approached again by law enforcement. And something you've got to remember in this country is that we have the right to, and the God-given absolute right to, the presumption of innocence. And no arrest, bail, warrant, time incarcerated can diminish and can be considered in light of that very valuable presumption of innocence. And there's a reason why we have a presumption of innocence, because it was throwing off the yoke of the old world, of the empire of Britain, where you didn't get that presumption and you didn't have the right to silence, and you could be interrogated at will and isolated and locked in the Tower of London until you squealed like a canary. So there's reasons why these protections are in place, and the erosion of these protections is perhaps there's good reason for it, but regardless of whether there is or not, it is what it is. So how to protect those who are mentally diminished, either through some sort of invisible injury, some sort of mental disorder, or a mental disability, a lack of complete faculties and intelligence that makes them vulnerable to these types of pressures, not complete understanding of their constitutional right to silence, not a complete understanding of the requirement that they affirmatively invoke their right to constitutional silence, and that they renew it on a 14-day period. That is probably beyond the grasp of many suspects, and certainly juvenile suspects. And we need to be on guard about that, because one day that suspect might be somebody you love or care about, or is a cousin, a neighbor's kid, what have you. And these are things that cannot just be brought up during the times when it's convenient, or it can get into the papers or onto CNN or some sensationalist news, because we know from recent history, and not just the Brendan Dassey matter, but other cases where juveniles and those with diminished mental capacity, whatever that cause may be, have given false confessions, including up to almost 30% of those who have some sort of mental disability of some kind. And the power of suggestion on the vulnerable part of our population is extremely strong and persuasive. We just need to be aware of that. We need to have that dialogue, so that way we can protect our friends, loved ones, etc.